All right. Hello, this is Beyond the Pale. My name's Keyshawn Wade,
I'm Laura McIntyre.
And I'm Claire McClinton.
and today we are on week 4 of Beyond the Pale. So we have been continually having conversations as it pertains to Project 2025, and how it relates to Flint. And today we just wanted to take a little bit more time to, kind of talk through that a little bit more, and kind of focus more directly on the 5 different sections of Project 2025. So today we'll be focusing on the first section, which is titled Taking the Reins of Government. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so,
Yeah, last week we had a very robust discussion with Mama Claire, um, and we wanted to continue that because you know how it is. You get into a discussion and it's going pretty well, and then towards the end, all of a sudden, all the juicy stuff comes up, and that's pretty typical. So. Um, yeah, we're dragging Claire back in here with us, but it's all for a good cause. So
right,
um, we have been continuously making connections um, with dictatorship, with totalitarianism, with democracy, and what we touched on last week was the Democracy Defense League. Actually, in its inception, was about protecting and maintaining democracy,
right,
and fighting in Michigan the financial emergency manager. So that's going to be our discussion, is continuing making those connections, those explicit connections, but then also making it relevant for what the implications are for now.
right. And a part of that is obviously the impacts that it's having on our community, and us being together as a community. So we really want to kind of have community be a part of this conversation by calling in if you are able. That call in number is 248-820-5053. If there's anything that comes up that you feel you want to add to or have a question about, please call in. Yeah, and let's have some community conversations. Let's learn together as a community, and expand our understanding as a community. Yeah, so if we can just, I guess, jump right into it. Um, Project 2025 is broken up into 5 sections. We on the first go around, we did do a little bit, going over kind of a summary of each section and a little bit of the foreword and stuff like that. But now we're going to go more in depth and talk directly about each section. So today, again, the first section is titled Taking the Reins of Government. And it really focuses on the role that the role that they want the president to play, in the administration, and in their understanding of the Constitution and their reading of the Constitution. There are definitely a lot of interpretations of the Constitution, and this kind of conservative take of the Constitution is really, I guess, the foundation of how they're basing their politic. Claire, I mean, not Claire, Laura is making a face. So I want her to expound on
Well,
that a little bit.
I think you're being very generous
Hmm.
in terms of the way that you're describing the situation. To me, I think, and in the first week we talked about this, we did a lot of talk about rhetoric because they were taking explicit phrases from the preamble to the Constitution. We talked about back in school how we were, taught how to sing, we the people in order to form, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And they're lifting phrases from that, but I think it's disingenuous. And this is my opinion.
Mhm.
I think it's just a way to make a connection, to make legitimacy for some very neoliberal, very conservative almost conservative policies and agenda that may or may not have connections to the Constitution and to the original writers of the Constitution. So I'm not quite so sure that it's like, oh, this is just a very conservative interpretation of the Constitution. I think they're throwing the Constitution out entirely.
Mm.
And it's just a smokescreen. It's like I said, it's disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we did talk about was that a lot of this is coming out of the Heritage Foundation, which is, as I mentioned, a conservative think tank that has a lot of dark money with an agenda, and the agenda isn't necessarily ideological or about philosophy, the philosophy of the Constitution. It's got an agenda that we don't necessarily know exactly what it is,
Mm-hmm.
but they always say follow the money. And if we were to follow the money, if we were to know what the agenda is exactly, this covert hidden agenda, then I think it's more insidious, and that it's more about making money and power moves for particular groups of people, at the expense of others. Let's just put it there.
Well, I think that's a great point. And I think that correction of our when we're looking at this, that I guess making that distinction is going to be key in how we continue to resist away from this. And
Yeah, I don't think this is a benign philosophical
Right.
treatise.
well, no, I don't
And I
think
don't
it
think
is
you
either.
do either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
And it's not an intellectual exercise,
Mhm.
right? This is about things that are going to be very impactful and directly impact us. And we from Flint can really speak to that, because in the beginning, I think we were, it wasn't necessarily an intellectual exercise, but looking at the financial emergency manager laws that were being brought to Michigan, we were like, oh my gosh, something bad is going to happen. You take away the democratic rights of the people. You impose a manager who hasn't been elected by the people, who supplants the city council and the mayor and the school boards and the unions, then the consequences are going to be disastrous. Well, fast forward 10, 15 years, we've had a water crisis. We've had, and in Claire's terms, a water disaster, and it's still ongoing. And there's other things that happened in addition to that. So it's not just an intellectual exercise anymore. It's not a what could happen or what if situation. It's like, this actually happened. People got poisoned. People died. People are still suffering. And that's just the environmental impact. The economic impact is we're indebted to an illegal bond that we have to pay off. Our assets have been stripped, have been given away, and we're in a more precarious economic position as well.
Right. Yeah. So if we could kind of talk more about, I guess, section 1,
Mm-hmm.
something that they talk a lot about is the need to deconstruct the centralized administrative state. So when we think about that, we can think of that as like individual kind of agencies that promote or carry out the function of government. So, like, what's some examples? Can we, like, the Department of State,
Education,
the Department of Education,
environmental resources,
environmental resources,
food and drug safety.
right?
I mean, I think the kind of things that I don't want to make generalizations, but when I was growing up in the 70s, there was a lot of attacks on food. The milk, dairy, different industries were being poisoned, and there was a lot of pushback. And so there was a lot of, acknowledgement about, chemicals and poisons in our environment. And at the time, we were really fighting to have things put into place to protect those entities. And I don't know if your generation or subsequent generations, there's just this idea that those things should be protected, and that's a good way to think about it. But it's not guaranteed, right? And these things are in danger of being stripped or pushed back again. But at least we've got this idea that we shouldn't be poisoned. We should have clean water. We should have, and it shouldn't be cost prohibitive, right? People are pushing back to the CEO of Nestle saying that water is not a human right. There's reaction to that saying it absolutely is a human right. So this attack is quite alarming to me. That it's coming against some of our basic assumptions about what it means to be human and what it means to be a whole person.
Right. Um,
Claire, were you gonna
No, I'm gonna let
chime?
him finish with the finish wrapping up that section of the
oh,
project 2025.
right.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, because I think another point that needs to be made
Mhm.
is, again, that this section is talking about the need to not only deconstruct the centralized administrative state, but also make it so that political appointees and those who follow kind of the whims of the president and the whims of the executive branch, um, make it so that they have um, power only through following the orders of the executive branch. So something, I think the effect that will have is like the um, kind of destruction of separation of powers and kind of checks and balances, something that is kind of uh, central to American government and kind of gives us the ability to fight for justice in different ways. I think something that we saw throughout like the 60s, the 50s, well, really the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s was the role that the Supreme Court had in um, balancing out the power dynamics that be between the different branches of government and giving the people um, some sense of justice in the sense that, like, we got Brown versus the Board of Education, we got
Civil rights, fair housing. Although we never did get the ERA passed,
hmm,
we had Roe v. Wade, um, which of course has been severely,
impacted,
basically reversed.
right?
Um, it's really interesting, kind of what's happened with the Supreme Court, in that it really has become a shadow or even a mockery of what it is supposed to be.
Hmm.
It's not, a balanced group of justices. It's more of like political appointees that kind of are there until they die. And it's become more politically strategic than just, we're going to appoint someone who has a way of, who has a lot of scholarship, who is thoughtful, who is a critical thinker, who may have a difference of opinion, um, but has, expertise in constitutional and legislative law.
Mhm.
And that just seems to be out the window these
Right.
days, because it's now it's you're going to appoint somebody who is a person, a very flawed person, who has an opinion about something that isn't necessarily based in a legal code. It's based in a moral code, a religious code, a I don't even know what some of like Clarence Thomas, what his code is. To be honest, his code is terrifying. Um, yeah.
And I think with Project 2025, we'll definitely see more of that because this, I mean, reading this is laying out the groundwork for um, basically pl- a dictator to be in the role of president, um, and making it so that the only people who can carry out um, governments are those who swear allegiance to him. Um, Yeah. So I think with that, with understanding kind of um, the role that they see the president acting out in Project 2025, I think that can speak kind of a little bit to more. I think we need definitions of like what is dictatorship, what
Mhm.
is authoritarianism, um, and kind of understanding um, how and why that is not um,
How it's antithetical to democracy.
right. Thank you for finishing that.
Well,
Mhm.
and I think a component that hasn't really that's been brought up separate but outside of the Project 2025 component is what is being called the cult of personality as well. That it's not just about the president. Right now the focus is on Donald Trump and what is has been labeled the cult of personality. His it's he's being voted for as a as an entity bigger and beyond himself. If somebody else were running in his stead, this think group, this conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, is putting something into place that's going to be there whether or not Trump is at the helm or not. And I'm not sure, but it just seems to me like people are reacting instead of being proactive. They're being reactive, and that people are making decisions based on emotions, not on legal scholarship, critical thinking, um, even fairness or equality, justice, or basic principles of humanity,
hmm
really.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so if we could just, I think, look at the bigger picture, I think focusing power in the executive branch is something that we've seen before.
Yes.
Um, and it's something that happened to us here in Flint
Yes.
through Public Act 436. Um, and I think Miss Claire could say a little bit more about kind of what it means to have someone um, who is appointed to be over you
Mhm.
and not chosen by the people.
Yes. Well, everybody here in Flint knows about the emergency manager and how that was an expression of dismantling democracy. We had no say so. A person was dispatched by the governor and seated in various cities around Michigan, predominantly majority minority cities, and they were set here to make decisions on behalf of corporate interests. So I want to pull back a little bit and say who benefited from emergency manager and who's benefiting with Project 2025 that we're already seeing little droplets of it being established. And I don't think it hurts for us to try to dig deep enough to see, well, who benefits from them? not just somebody who want to be a dictator. That's not the only person. It's a whole class of people. We
Mm,
live in a capitalist society, and whoever got the capital rule. This is the way our society is set up. So the people that benefit from this is corporate interests and Wall Street interests. So um, in the case of the emergency manager in Flint, we see that we are rapidly moving towards a market driven government where especially water is the main agenda item on the agenda. And if we're not careful and if we don't continue to fight for our right to water as a human right and a right to clean water as a human right, we going to look down the road and with Project 2025 and with Public Act 436 still on the books. Now we got rid of Snyder. We put in a Democrat governor, Democrat attorney general, Democrat secretary of state, Democrat House and Senate. But why is that law still on the books? And so if we're not careful, we do not want to pass on a dystopia, ugly, dark society to our children and grandchildren. And without us intervening in that, that's exactly what we're looking at. And we will look up and let's say 20, 30 years from now, you'll have Lake Huron LLC, Lake Ontario CO Company, Lake Michigan Inc., Lake Erie, and on,
Well,
Lake Superior. So what we're trying to do is that the emergency manager law and Project 2025 is a opportunity for corporate interests to fulfill their fondest dreams, but we have to continue to fight for our fondest dreams. And
right.
our fondest dreams is clean water, affordable water, access to housing, access to health care. These laws make it very, very difficult for us to realize our dreams.
Right.
So we're going to have to deal with that. And the last thing I want to say is that we had organically uh, connected with groups all over the state of Michigan who did not want to see emergency manager law. They went and got petitions and got it on the ballot. But we're going to have to recreate that kind of relationship and take it to the next level. And the next level is protecting those communities from corporate infringement, protecting ourselves to water. And this situation you mentioned about abolishing the EPA, we in court now suing the EPA because they didn't do their job. So what does it say that they don't even want to have it? And we got to get these corporate people out of these agencies. We don't just want to dismantle them. Get the corporate hands off of those public agencies.
Mhm,
Get Bessie DeVos out of the education department,
mhm.
and so on and so forth. So that's all I want to say.
well, Rick Snyder ran on the platform that he was a businessman.
Hmm. Yes,
His
the
handle
nerve.
was one tough nerd,
Yes.
and he bragged about how his decisions were going to be economic decisions.
Hmm.
Um, and the thing that we've been talking about in the past 2 weeks is that this is not new. I mean, we talk about capitalism and corporations. I mean, we've already seen that trend with, say, for example, Little Caesars Arena, right? That was shocking when it happened, and now it's taken for granted. Nobody even bats an eye. But to make that connection, well, it's one thing to call something an arena, Little Caesars. What about Little Caesars Great Lakes?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
exactly. All
that's
right.
exactly
That's right.
what's gonna happen. It already
Yeah.
has happened.
Mhm.
Maybe not on the scale of our water supply,
Mhm.
but our public assets
Mhm.
that are being taken away from the people from
That's right.
democratic control by corporate politicians on the dollar.
Yes.
Right.
You want to give out the number? Because I don't think it's on the screen for
Oh,
people to call.
yeah, I think that's a great point. Again, if you'd like to call in, the number is 248-820-5053. Again, that's 248-820-5053.
So yeah, and another thing that Mama Claire was saying was like, in 20 or 30 years. Well, 20 or 30 years ago was when we had Reaganomics, when we had, Thatcherism in England, in Europe. And we were saying some of the similar things that we're saying now, um, and they've come to fruition. They've come to pass, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse, and it's now become about things like water, air, land, um, basically the space that you're occupying is not even going to be your own anymore.
That's right.
Keyshawn's talked about this we talked about Mark Lamont Hill's book Nobody. You're not, your own body isn't even your own in the sense that there's no place for you to be. We have a very high rate of homelessness or people who are unhoused or have precarious housing. We have high rates of food deserts. So the very things that make us human are precarious, are being stripped away from us. And these policies are gonna make them even more intractable. But that we shouldn't give up, because while these things are getting more and more solidified and more structural, if we recognize that that's exactly what they are things that they're made up, they're structures, right? We can say no, they're not legitimate. Like, for example, the bond debt that we were entered into for our water supply, we can declare it illegitimate. I mean, there's just different strategies that, ways to approach that.
So, something that I think also needs to be talked about in I mean, something that we've lived through, something that we've seen, something that we've experienced is the lack of accountability that comes when the basic necessities of life are commodified, put into the hands of the corporate class, and how that is, it comes to pass that there is no accountability taken for those actions that aren't consistently seen in our Supreme Court. Again, as a tool in which um, political class is full of a certain um, political group being used and being strategically chosen so that there is no accountability from um,
Well, there's accountability to the donors. There's accountability to the dark money that has inserted the people into these positions of power. That's the accountability we're talking about. I think there's another level of accountability, which is just basic accountability. I think that's what you're talking about, not something as insidious or calculated or even very Machiavellian. I just feel like there's these puppet masters that are pulling strings, and that's not fear mongering. It's there are we actually know that, for example, and I keep mentioning the Heritage Foundation. We actually know Heritage Foundation is one of those puppet masters.
Hmm.
But in terms of accountability, I hope people aren't getting discouraged about holding people accountable.
Mm.
And I think that they are, because when you've got a president or a former president of the United States who's committed crimes, felonies, and has been convicted of them and is not being held accountable, I think that that brings our whole system into question. And I think in the context of that, challenging the Constitution,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
or at least rhetorically challenging it, is very discouraging. And it's something that when you look around you and you see all these people acting in horrible ways, or committing crimes and getting away with it, it really creates an atmosphere, a you know a malaise.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
I think that's what I was trying to get at. When
Mhm.
we saw what happened with the water crisis, there was basically, is it de facto or is it de jure? I think de facto, because de jure means it's in law, right?
Correct, yeah.
So there was de facto immunity given to Rick Snyder and
Mhm.
all of the political uh, accomplices that helped facilitate the Flint water crisis. I think my question is, how telling is it that the Supreme Court gave immunity to the president before Project 2025 was able to occur? How telling is it
Mhm.
that we are going to be in dire straits if Project 2025 comes to pass?
Mhm.
And I think Ms. Claire can say a lot on that.
Well, that's up to us. That's up to us what we do to because we the people, and especially the working class, we carve out our own future, and we're gonna have to fight for it. And I thought I did fail to mention that we have think tank right here in Michigan called the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. In 2001, they came out with an article in their magazine that they publish, and the name of their magazine is Privatization. That's the name of your magazine. And they had a special edition on Detroit, and they named all the different parts of Detroit that were public, including the transportation system, the people that repaired the trucks for maintenance, Belle Isle, Cobo Hall. They had all of that in the magazine about how under privatization these public assets could be run more efficient. And let's not forget that was one of the Public Act 4 narratives, that we need somebody to come in here because the people in Flint don't know how to run their own city. They don't know how to manage their money, and they this and that and the other. And so it is. So a lot of what is going to come to pass depends on what we do as a community. But I did want to share that even though some of the narrative about Project 2025 is being put based on Democrat and Republican, it's not. It's civil liberty and civil rights versus corporate. That's what it is. It's not Democrat and Republican. Yes, there's a party that's more accommodating to Project 2025. We understand that.
Mm.
But the experience we had in fighting Public Act 4, we had Republicans and everything from Republicans, the socialists, the communists, and everything came together because nobody wants to be stripped of their rights. And so I think we should really hold on to that experience as we go forward, and that we're not going to pigeonhole nobody. If you're against your civil liberties being destroyed, even a semblance of the Constitution, although the Constitution is not what it was written to be, but we are fighting for a more what? More perfect union. That's what we're trying to do. And so those of us that see the dangers and the horrors and have lived through Public Act 4, we want to see all freedom loving, peace loving, and democratic loving people come together and reverse this trend, which is nothing more than a corporate takeover of this country.
Again, I just want to give the call line number. That's 248-820-5053. But you were going to say something?
Oh, I was going to say a lot of things, but we have talked about, some of the more specific nuances.
Mhm.
Like, for example, Keyshawn talked about de jure and de facto segregation.
Mhm.
That's kind of like an old way of thinking about discrimination and segregation. And we've been talking about, because in Andy Highsmith's book, Demolition Means Progress, he actually proposes, along with some other scholars, about a new way of thinking that not just in this binary of de facto and de jure, but also administrative segregation.
Mhm.
And it's that's exactly what we were grappling with Public Act 436,
Mhm.
because using the old way of thinking of, like, oh well, here are these unfair laws, and here's unfair just attitudes of individuals, of people. It's like, no, because it allows people
Mhm.
to have a pass.
Mhm.
Like, well, that's just the way I was raised, or that's just what I think, or that's just my opinion. um, there are rules and regulations in place that are seemingly neutral,
Mhm.
that are anything but neutral. So, for example, Public Act 436, even though it was pretty blatant to most of us that it wasn't value neutral or that it wasn't benign,
Mhm.
it was that was the smoke screen that was being used to get it across. Right. The same thing with the smoke screen that's being used to get Project 2025 across. That's administrative segregation. They're trying to put it into regulations that don't exactly name the thing that it's doing.
Mhm.
Right. It's talking about, something that seems very, very glossy or very ideal, but in fact, what it does in practice is is very undemocratic,
Yes.
is inequitable, is um, discriminatory on the basis of a whole bunch of classes protected by by
Mhm.
humanity.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what I wanted to point out, is that we this whole thing is emotional, and I don't want to just throw that away, because people's
Yes.
feelings are very valid and legitimate. But on the other hand, when you look at the policies that are being put into place, you can't necessarily look at the way that the policies are being glossed up and written about. You have to look at what the impacts are going to be and what the implications for the impacts are going to be.
Mhm.
And we mentioned Maya Angelou, right?
Mhm.
Don't pay attention to what people tell you
Mhm.
that they're doing,
Show you. Yeah.
what they because pay attention to what they're showing,
Mhm. That's right.
right? And these Public Act 436 showed us what it did, as opposed to the way it was.
Mhm. But the people in Michigan showed them we're not as gullible and hateful as y'all think. We didn't take all that spirit and try to pull together a some kind of a statewide coalition, you know.
Because we didn't know. We did like.
Well,
It's
I'm
one
just
thing to
saying,
say,
we're looking back and trying to
Sure.
sum up for future reference.
if we had known that the Mackinac Center had this back there, I mean, it was all very covert. It was hidden. It was in the dark. It didn't reach the light of day
Well, it did. We just didn't know about it.
until no. I mean, it did. It did reach the light. When some of these emails got exposed, and Miguel del Toro blew the whistle
Yeah,
to his own detriment, and
Yes,
some
and-
other people as well. And some
Sure
of those
did.
emails got exposed, and went to Washington, and some of those things that were not supposed to get spoken out loud.
that's true. And we're gonna find out more when Dr.
Louise seems
Louise Seamster brings her book, and hopefully we're gonna even have even a deeper understanding. I can't
Right.
wait for some
We
of
have-
those
we have
who
a Demolition Means Progress Part 2.
yes, and I
Right.
can't wait to share that with the people who fought emergency management,
right.
because you could fight it in its on its face for being undemocratic, but to know the odious and dark manipulations that was going on by the corporate world, I think would be really mind-boggling and mind-opening for a lot of
And I
those
mean,
folks. Yeah.
what you just said about the manipulations that the corporate world uses to usurp away uh, our the things that we own collectively, the things that we own democratically, things that we control democratically. I meant to say, um, something that has been eye-opening to me, and I know I talked a little bit about this before, but um, a little bit more specifically what that meant for Flint. And that means from 2003, 2014, Flint lost out because of the way that the state of Michigan restructured its revenue sharing. And the way that someone put it was that the state of Michigan basically took it's like someone has two households, right? The state of Michigan took the the money that each household would have, used it to pay their bills, and saw the household there struggling and said, now this is the household they just took the money from, and said, you need to have a better budget, and you need to like figure out
Yes.
how to budget your money better,
That's right.
because you shouldn't be struggling. Mind you, the state of Michigan, from Flint alone, well, from collectively, the state of Michigan stole $6 billion from different communities doing this. But the way that the state of Michigan stole from Flint specifically, this number is $54,868,000
Yeah.
and $96.
Yeah.
So almost $55 million. Um, Yeah, Flint would have lost $54.9 million by the end of 2014. The deficit in its 2012 financial statements is $19.2 million. Flint could eliminate the deficit and pay off all of the $30 million of bonded indebtedness and still have over $5 million in surplus.
See there?
This is structured. This is
Exactly.
manufactured. This is something that's not inherent to the nature of our city. It's something
Administrative segregation.
exactly. It's not something that we have just because we are broken and Flint can't function a certain way because it needs so much help to function, and we're just
Yeah.
what's the word that people use a lot when like dysfunctional. We're not dysfunctional. We were created to be this way. We have people making power plays to limit our ability to democratically govern ourselves and have sovereignty over ourselves. I think Ms. Claire and Ms. Laura talking specifically about the corporate manipulations that it takes for everyone to believe that,
Mm-hmm.
and to have this kind of stigma follow us around is something that's so infuriating to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we were given the ability to govern ourselves, the water crisis never would have happened.
That's right.
I mean, the none of the things that we are living through would happen to us if we were given the ability to govern ourselves and make decisions that, first of all, factor our humanity and don't look at us as a dollar sign.
Yes.
And I think that's something that we really, really need to focus on going forward, is that we have the ability and we have the inherent, we have inherently what it takes to make sure we are all right as a community.
Yes.
We just have to be given the ability to act in our own best interest. And I think anything that doesn't allow that is in the way. It's not an ally, and we need to be refocusing as a community to spot what are those things not allowing us that sovereignty.
Well said.
All right.
So again, if anyone has any questions, any comments, the call-in number is again 248-820-5053. And we have about, I would say, like 10 more minutes left before an hour comes up. So if we have any call-ins, please let us know. Is there anything you two wanted to talk about more in depth, wanted to add?
Well,
Not for now.
I'd like to say, if nobody's calling in, just to kind of to reiterate and just to emphasize the connection between Project 2025 and the water crisis, and what you were talking about with this structural an artificial debt that was created to make us look as if we couldn't manage ourselves, our finances, and our money. That the revenue sharing readjustment put specifically for Flint, it created an unbalanced budget for Flint that made us look like we were financially insolvent. And then you had the financial emergency manager laws created to take away the democracy under, the excuse of financial insolvency. Now, with the revenue sharing getting twisted around so much, we had local leaders who felt like they didn't have a choice but to balance the city budget using our water bills. And so I don't know what the number is right now, but Claire, I think you at one point had identified over 63% of our water bills are now going to pay for the bond that we were entered into as a result of the water crisis. But before the water crisis, the money that was supposed to be going towards infrastructure, towards water treatment, towards water safety, our water treatment plant, was being misdirected to balance the budget.
Yes. Exactly. It's exactly right.
And a judge said that, eventually said that was happening, but yet it still did happen,
Yes.
and it still is happening today.
Mm-hmm.
So our water bill has now been broken down into 4 components, not just, water, but also the water fees. We have sewer and sewer fees. That all comes from this administrative segregative decision to restructure debt and financing on the state level.
Yeah.
afraid for what's going to happen on the federal level when this comes to play as well. And we have to understand that it's still in our power,
Yeah.
right? That the water is ours.
Mm-hmm.
The resources, the community resources are still ours.
Yes.
And under restructuring, a lot of things like I can't remember the specific name of the park in Benton Harbor that Whirlpool took over.
Gene Clark Park.
Gene Clark Park.
Gene Clark. Mm-hmm.
Um, there was another time that we were really making a big fuss about the Catherine Ferguson School in Detroit.
Oh yes, Lord have mercy. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things.
But those are little teachable moments
Yes. Yeah.
when those things happen, because they don't do it everything in one swell swoop, right?
Mm-hmm.
They peel the onion. They didn't take over
Like
the
peel
whole.
the onion
Yes.
or what did they say about boiling the frog? You put the frog
Yeah.
in the water and
Slowly.
increase the heat incrementally until it's dead.
Because there were very specific cities that Public Act 4 used to go in and seize their public assets.
And the Mackinac Center created a training facilities or a cohort of financial
did.
emergency managers. So there was a very specific group of men who were poised to be the
Teach 'em how to
financial
read, yeah.
emergency managers. It wasn't just a random sort of I'm going to select so and so. These were, and Gregory Weatherspoon was one of those in the cohort.
Yeah.
And he ended up being appointed temporarily the superintendent for Flint schools. Because remember, this isn't just about municipalities.
Yes.
It's also about school systems.
Which he had been in Muskegon Heights, and outsourced and gave away all their public assets, their football field and a lot of other stuff down there.
Yeah.
So he was why was he so attractive to come here? They
Because
sent him
we
to the
need
wrong
somebody
city.
business minded. We need somebody who's gonna make the hard decisions that's necessary.
Right.
And we're talking about schools where children are educated, where their future is basically decided, where if they don't have a hot meal at home or they don't have food at home, this is where they get food. It's a lot of children's only meal of the day for some people. And so that is where we're sending these hard-minded financial emergency managers.
To make those decisions, yeah.
Perfect. What a great match.
Well, I mean, there's so much to say. I don't want to, start jumping into some of the implications. I want to keep it on track. I want to keep it on focus. And I don't want it to get too discouraging, because I think that today is, post-election day. Maybe some of us have fatigue. It was raining. I know I was driving around trying to get people to go to the polls, and it's one of those off elections that it's just tiring.
Yeah.
It's just tiring. Right? We're sick and tired of being tired.
Yeah.
That is for
And
sure.
there's just so many things you have to deal with on a daily basis that it really does get tiring to continually fight. But this is the only option we got. So if you have to take a break, take a nap, eat some good food, watch a TV show, eat, take a nap, then go up,
And
do all of
Keyshawn
that.
recommends Cool Ranch Doritos.
I do.
Go have a bag of Cool
Oh,
Ranch Doritos.
okay. Don't start me on that.
I mean, I'm a snacker. I gets down.
I love snacks.
Yeah. But all right. So it's kind of a somber week for us, but we will be back next week
Right.
and every week
Yeah.
on Wednesday. And in fact, I think we're even going to have a special episode this week, aren't we?
We might. We'll definitely see.
I'm trying to talk Keyshawn into it. We've got a couple of out of town guests coming in
Right.
that we would like to introduce you guys to.
But yeah, next week we'll be talking a little bit more specifically about section 2 of Project 2025. Again, there's 5 sections.
Good.
So we'll be
Look
focusing on
forward. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
section 2, making those connections. And again, this has been Beyond the Pale. We thank you so much for watching. If it was on the live or off the live, whenever.
Yep. Thank you to Out of the Mud again for hosting, for sponsoring. Miss Claire McClinton from the Democracy Defense League as our very special guest for third week running. And I'm Laura McIntyre,
I'm Keyshawn Wade.
and we're Beyond the Pale.